Oh, wait, is that a different one? Exciting. Okay, cool. That's what I thought I was going to talk about. I think the title is Creative Industries plus Entrepreneurship, but close enough. All right, so I am going to take you through a whirlwind of images, and I will talk at you, and I'll leave some time for some questions at the end. So here we go. So I started my creative journey as a sculptor. My father was an orthopedic surgeon. I was groomed to be an orthopedic surgeon. So I had to fight a lot of gravity to take my own path. And so one of my first pieces is called Hear Yourself. And my quote's a little cut off, but I think anytime you're doing something creative and especially trying to make a living out of it, especially in the entrepreneur world, you really need to know yourself first. If you don't have your own guidance of where you are as a person in the world, then everything that you try to do is going to be without a point of reference. And so understanding other people's incentives and motives and interests is lost unless you have that point. I also really believe in trusting your instincts and your guts. There's a lot of things in the world. There's a lot of conformity. There's a lot of tradition. There's a lot of culture. There's a lot of sameness and everything. You know, if you stay in a hotel room in this part of the world and any other part of the world, it's pretty much the same. That mass production actually zaps people's creativity. The more you get to experience things that are different, the more you understand the possibilities in the world. So I always teach my students to really trust their own feelings. And I like saying this phrase that if everybody thinks you're crazy, you actually might be onto something. And enough people have told you, oh, that's not possible, you can't do that, that also means that maybe nobody else has tried it. So that doesn't always work, obviously, but there's plenty of times where if you're thinking of something and everybody else doesn't think it's possible, then it might be. You know, there are so many things in the world that used to be considered impossible that are now possible, that it's just a perspective of time. Also, my mother taught me to follow your heart. Do what you really love and be passionate about it, and that will make everything happen for you. And you know, when you're starting an idea or an entrepreneurial approach to something, if you're really passionate about it and you test it with other people and find that there's other people that have passion to it, that's like your best indicator from the start that you have a chance of making it successful. Oh, I jumped ahead there. What happened? Okay. So I went from sculptor to being a teacher to starting my own school, mostly out of a extreme dissatisfaction with the art world and paying a lot of money for a high-priced art school. I felt at age 27 that I could do a better job of starting a school. I don't think their bravery and stupidity and sort of foolishness are all really close together. But I just kind of went for it. I started a place called The Crucible in Oakland with a grant for $1,750 on this basic principle of making, inspiring creativity for everyone, and a place that's a non-competitive learning environment where it's okay to be a beginner. And I'll just pause for a second and say this is in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is a totally different world than any place else. We have a saying in the Silicon Valley Bay Area, if you're able to make something happen there, all you've done is prove that you can make something happen there. It doesn't mean it will happen the same way elsewhere. But it did start very humbly and expanded incredibly quickly to a 56,000 square foot facility. Now, 20 years later, it's the largest nonprofit industrial art school in all of US, possibly the world. It's hard to measure. Teaches about 8,000 students a year, and everything from fire dancing to glass working to glass flame working, woodworking, metal working, a whole bunch of other industrial arts. A lot of things that artists don't typically have access to. And while it seems like it's a very innovative sort of alternative art school, what it truly became is an alternative way to teach and build community outside of the industrial arts. And one of the ideas that I always talk about is this concept of trying to fly and grow roots at the same time. The flying element is making the world-renowned facility with great artists and faculty to draw people in. But because this is based in Oakland, in West Oakland, where there's a low-income facility or housing area where there's a lot of people that are underserved. We also did a lot of work to reach out to the community and build connections. And that together, this is our youth outreach program, kids in West Oakland, that we couldn't get in the building any other way than offering to fix their bicycles for them for free. And then we built a whole program around that where they got to modify bicycles and be creative. And so we had kids riding around West Oakland in these very unique, creative bicycles, and that was one of our best outreach and sort of ways to get the community involved. And so that combination of those two together really brings a whole different approach to how you think about your operations. This is a mission-based organization. It isn't focused on making money, but it is have a $3 million a year annual budget. And so it does actually do quite well for a nonprofit. It's now 20 years old. The true test of someone that founds a place like this is to step away from it. I ran it for the first 12 years, and now it's in its 20th year, 8 years without me. So I feel like I've set it off into the world, and it's doing its own thing, which is pretty amazing. Inspiring people at a young age, I'll talk a little bit more about my lab at Stanford that studied creativity, but most of us, when we were young, show of hands, did painting and drawing and played and were creative and imaginative. How many are still doing that today? All right, some of you, that's great. What we found, and I'll get to this later, is that around age 10, most people lose their creativity. They stop pursuing that and they pursue other things. And so we really try to push that. And one of the key tenets of this type of entrepreneurial approach is diversity is strength. And the more you can have people from different backgrounds, different ages, different classes, different cultures, different sexes, different sexual orientations, all coming together and working together, the stronger and the more innovative the community is, and the more you're able to welcome new ideas because there's so many people bringing it in. And sort of like this conference, I'm already meeting people from around the world, which is amazing. One of the challenges we had was that we're in the middle of West Oakland, which is predominantly an African-American region, and we didn't have anybody in the sculpture world that taught sculpture that was African-American. But now, after being in that facility for over 20 years, we have kids that started at 12 that have been with us the whole time and are now in their 20s, and they're now our faculty. And so sometimes you have to seed and plant that diversity to bring it to fruition. So we do a lot of youth empowerment with both young men and women, but especially women, because most women aren't getting to weld and grind and hit hot metal or do machining. So we focus on trying to change that dynamic quite a bit. Another non-conventional approach to getting people out in the world and seeing what you're doing is this is our educational response vehicle. It's an old fire truck that we modified heavily, and we sent it out in the world to advertise the types of things that this school would do. And it has a 30-foot fireball that shoots up out of it to get people's attention. We found, we started as an industrial arts school, but we found that people were really drawn to the fire arts, as we call them now, welding, glass working, metal casting, blacksmithing. They weren't interested in drawing and painting. There was other places to do that. So we sort of took that and used it as our motto for transformation. That we're using fire to transform materials into new things, and we're also transforming people into new types of creative endeavors. And one of the things that was completely unintentional about the Crucible is that we thought we'd be training people to work in factories. And about that time, we started in '99, a lot of those jobs disappeared in the United States. And what we ended up teaching was sort of artisans, people that would design, build, and market their own ideas and put them out in the world. And we had a whole influx, and we still do, of people from the tech industry that got tired of sitting in front of a computer and wanted to make something with their hands, but had marketing skills, had startup ideas, and would launch programs and projects and businesses out of the Crucible. This is another outreach approach. This is the world's fastest diesel motorcycle. We took a car motor from a BMW car, turbo diesel, and put it into a custom-built motorcycle, and we set the world's fastest diesel motorcycle record using B100 biodiesel. And this was a little side project of mine, but it actually got us on the cover of Popular Mechanics, got us a bunch of sponsorship, and broke us into a whole new world of people that were interested in what we were doing. And this is one of the topics I like to talk about, is taking opposites and sort of cramming them together. Has anybody heard of a biodiesel land speed record motorcycle? They're sort of the opposites, you know, as far as biodiesel is this fuel that's organic. It's usually used with veggie oil, and people are doing it in a very sort of non-performance issue. And then mixing it with this high-performance realm, we were able to make something different that hadn't happened before. Another example of how we launched this from, you know, a grant from $1,750 to a $3 million a year organization was doing large-scale fire operas. Again, taking extremes, taking the industrial arts along with opera singers and dancers. This is from Romeo and Juliet. I had been making sculpture, but I started running an organization, so most of what I made was fire props and sets for shows like this. This is the Dance of the Nights ballroom scene, where you have flamenco dancers and aerialists hanging from a flaming chandelier. This seems all outlandish and crazy, but it was a really great ploy. In San Francisco, there's a whole group, if you've ever been there, part of the area called Pacific Heights, and that's where all the people that support the San Francisco Opera and San Francisco Ballet pretty much reside, and they fund you know, high-end theatrical performances. I knew one person in that area, and I was trying to figure out how can I get Pacific Heights to come to West Oakland, which especially at the time was really known as a very crime-infested, not a place these people would even venture to come over. So I said, oh, we're going to do a fire opera, and we've done a number of them, fire operas and ballets. This is Kurt Weill's Seven Deadly Sins, and you have an opera singer singing with people blowing glass. Dido and Aeneas, they're casting the spearhead of Dido's spear, which she then kills herself with at the end of the show, but it's actually cast in metal every night on stage. So the first year we got one person to sponsor fire ballet from the San Francisco realm, and they invited all their friends. And then the next year we had 20 sponsors. And then the next year, all those people became sponsors of our youth program. This is the world's first and probably only ballerina pas de deux with a motorcycle stunt rider. This show went on for 8 nights, and he would ride a wheelie on a very small stage, just slightly bigger than this, every night and never flew off. It was amazing. And so those extremes, bringing those different people together, we sort of redefined what ballet and opera meant. Ballet for us was anything that had movement. So we had break dancers, we had wushu martial artists, we had aerialists, we had stunt riders, all sorts of things. And that actually got the San Francisco Opera interested in, hey, these people can help us get new audiences. And so the idea wasn't just solely to raise funds, it was to break a new ground to make new opportunities. This was our fire odyssey based on the Homer's Odyssey, and it had an 8,000-gallon moat of water in the front where performers would be underwater with scuba tanks, and they'd get a little knock on the stage to come up. These are the sirens. We had a Mongolian contortionist, huge metal sculptures to represent the gods. This is Zeus with a Tesla coil, and here's the whole setup with Athena, Aeolus, the god of the winds, and Poseidon, which we actually had the Oakland Fire Department as the god of the sea shooting water across the stage. And you know, I give a TEDx talk about how do you turn a no into a yes. Being able to do this kind of stuff is not something that most fire departments are excited about doing. And I use that analogy for any type of bureaucracy or authoritative figure that's got regulations and rules, and that those people often will try to say, oh, you can't do that. You're not allowed to do that. When we were in Berkeley, we were told we weren't supposed to be zoned in the area we were, and then after 2 years of struggling, they told us, well, actually, there's no place in Berkeley that's zoned for your use because you're doing something completely different. So we moved to Oakland. Fire departments have lots of rules. They have lots of fire safety precautions. We started trying to do things that they had never seen of or heard of before. And so the two ways that we dealt with it was, one is we tried to enroll them in the process. This is what they called a on-the-scene training exercise. We put them in two of our shows. But also we created our own fire safety plan. We trained our own fire safety volunteers. We had 2 fire trucks that actually shot fire and water to put out fires. We basically made our own fire department and made our own rules and gave them a huge 50-page fire safety plan for every show. So in some ways we out-fire department the fire department. We gave them so much bureaucracy to read through, and they're like, hey, these guys actually know what they're doing. Currently, I now consult with the Oakland Fire Department on performances and installations of industrial arts facilities. So we've sort of set the standard of doing that. And that idea of enrolling the people that are most likely to tell you no to your idea is really critical. And so when you're talking about creative industries, there's a lot of what I like to call alternative currencies. In the startup world, everybody's focused on raising a bunch of money and a capital and hiring the right people to get the work done. In this world, most people don't have that kind of money. And so there's other things that we can use to motivate folks. And one of them is t-shirts, which sounds really hilarious, but all of you got like cool little backpacks today and a water bottle. That stuff counts, I'm really happy about my pin. It makes people feel belong. And so it's much smaller of an incentive, but t-shirts, creative agency within the organization, if you give them a framework. So these shows, I would create an outline, but I would invite and enroll people to take part in it and give them a creative opportunity to not only help tell the story, but also I'd sit with them and say, what's the one thing you've always wanted to do? You're a ballet dancer. Is there anything you've always thought of doing, the craziest thing you could ever imagine? Here's your chance to do it. And that type of incentive is way better than paying people lots of money. People are inspired to push their own limits. And you can't fund that when it's flowing freely, and it's contagious. And so the more you have people doing this, the more it becomes part of a thing. Also feeding them and giving them creative titles are all things that are a lot easier than coming up with the money to pay them. So after 12 years, I left the Crucible. I've set it on its path. It was pretty much already teaching about 6,000 to 7,000 people a year. It has a whole scholarship program for the youth, and it's still doing great things today. But I accepted a position at the Stanford d.school, which is known for innovators, building creative confidence, and this idea around not focusing on the product, but the designer itself. That we're creating designers instead of designs. And it's a very funky little part of Stanford. Stanford's has quite a reputation. It's in the engineering department, and so I was teaching under the mechanical engineering design department, which was sort of looked down upon as the soft engineering. But at the same time, the d.school is known worldwide for design thinking. David Kelly, the founder of IDEO, also started this, and that program has been running the joint program of design, where they're actually taking art and engineering and bringing it together to make product design, which is a really unique process. And it's based on, so this is the process that everybody thinks is the secret formula. It really isn't. It's a great tool for creative approach. And most of you, if you've worked in the creative industries, do a lot of these things. It's first of all empathizing with your user and really understanding what they're about, doing need-finding interviews and asking the open-ended questions, then ideating a design, defining what their problem is, and then ideating potential ways to solve it. Prototyping and testing, and then you sort of go back around and again and again. And I don't know if I can invite all you to the workshop I'm teaching tomorrow, but I'm actually teaching design thinking for entrepreneurs, I think tomorrow at 10 a.m. But this process gets used a lot of different ways. It was originally for product design, now it's for experience design and for concepts and things way beyond it. IDEO has gone far and wide with this. And one of the things I've found working at Stanford and at Google and Autodesk and all the places I've been is that the more I'm around experts, the more I realize I'm not an expert. And instead, I'm one of those designers that has an experience that's they like to say is like an inch or a foot deep and a mile or 10 miles wide, depending on how much you've done it. And having a little experience in everything really helps in that. So I ran 2 programs there. I launched a program called Redesigning Theater based on all of my shenanigans at the crucible of messing and disrupting the traditional ideas of theater. I got to push the limits further and incorporate technology and social media to really push how the next generation of people could experience live theater. And at the same time, there's this whole thing called the maker movement. How many people have heard of that? Most of you? Okay, great. So the maker movement is sort of this do-it-yourself movement that started, I don't know if it's fair to say it started in the Bay Area, but it seems like there's a lot of that happening. There's Maker Media that has a big Make Festival that's coming up in May. The same idea of people having ownership in their products and their objects and the things they do, that they could hack things and make things. That same sort of trend was happening in theater, where people were tired of sitting back and watching. They wanted to lean in experiential experiences where they could actually be part of the action. So using design thinking, we sort of pioneered some really interesting new ideas, flipping the whole experience. One of the things I really enjoy with this, and I think that applies to a lot of different elements of entrepreneurship and new ideas, is charting the free will of the user. So if you think about traditional theater, most people that come to theater have a few options. One, they can buy a ticket or not. They can show up on time. If they're not there at 8 o'clock, the doors close, they can't come in. They can sit quietly and enjoy the show. They can clap when they're supposed to. If they do anything outside of that, they're usually asked to leave. It's a pretty thin line of enjoyment for traditional theatrical goers. If you think of that compared to, say, a sporting event or anything else where people pay money, a live music concert, they have a lot more freedom to enjoy the show and participate or dress up and so forth. So we really played with that quite a bit, and these are some of my students prototyping, different ideas around how to reinvent theater. So we flipped things where we made the lobby the coolest part of the theater, where there was art installations and photo booths and food and DJs, and there was 5 different theaters where they could come in and experience live theater at any point in the night, throughout the night, and walk out when they wanted to. Very different experiences. Doing secret societies, doing things where you had to find clues throughout the place, where you had to dress up and chase the actors through different parts of a building. Lots of physical interaction ideas. And it all culminated in a big prototype at Alcatraz. Most of you probably heard of the prison island that floats off of San Francisco. We had all of our audience members were guest prisoners for 4 hours. So taking that idea of free will and flipping it around, where they were sort of indentured into an experience where they were stuck on an island in a prison, being gently treated like prisoners. But in the middle of the lunchroom, there was a fight scene that broke out into a dance routine. There was ghosts they could speak to of past prisoners. This whole experiential idea of what it was like to be a prisoner at Alcatraz. And while I really enjoyed that project, I got an opportunity, which basically meant I raised a bunch of money from Autodesk to launch the Creative Ignition Lab, which I felt was a little bit deeper into what I was very interested in. I myself am dyslexic, and so I grew up sort of having to use my visual, experiential, and embodied sort of skill set to deal with what I call the text-based world, where you have to read a book and write a report, and that everything is focused on language. And today it still bothers me in 2019 that I have to use my fingers to type characters onto a screen to get my ideas out. I think that's still, someday we'll look back at that and think of how barbaric that was, but we're not there yet. We're getting close. So this project was really looking at ways to use technology to harness and unleash the power of visual, experiential, and embodied thinkers. And if you're familiar with Autodesk, they're a big manufacturer of software for architecture, for engineering. They do a lot of stuff for movies. And so I worked with them, and I actually pioneered the first Stanford lab off of campus inside the Autodesk headquarters, which was great to get Stanford kids out of the Stanford bubble and into the working world. I found that most Stanford students have amazing resumes, but they don't spend enough time outside playing or building things with their hands. And so we try to get them out into the real world a little bit. And we did a bunch of research on creativity. And this is what I was talking about earlier, that we found that around age 10, most kids in the United States at least, they stop taking creative risks. Anybody know why? What happens at age 10? Okay, I'll give you the answer. Socially aware, they start becoming aware of their peers and they get a lot of peer pressure. But also, especially if you're following the American news, you see a lot about parents trying to make sure their kids get into good colleges. The pressure to start getting good grades starts around 10 to 12. And we found this very direct correlation of kids that focused on grades let go of their creativity. Because you can't afford to make mistakes. You need to get good grades. And it's not a culture that's rewarding of people making efforts that fail. And I teach a lot of design thinking in China and different parts of the world, and where cultures are really against that concept of failure, really stifles innovation and creativity and the idea of pushing and trying new things. And so what we also found is that in the United States, especially, people when they hit their mid-20s, not all of them, but a good part of them started reaching out and saying, hey, I've had my first couple of jobs, and you know what? I really don't like this. I miss being creative. And they come and they seek out places like the D.school, which has adult education, or places like the Crucible. And then there's another crowd that hits it when they're in their 30s and 40s, and there's other people that never revisit that. But I really believe that creativity and closely tied to it, innovation is a basic human right. And the more people are able to express themselves creatively, not only does it make them happier and make them more connected to themselves and other people, it actually makes them more creative. It's a muscle. The more you push your limits on what you think is possible, if you all went out today at the end of the day and said, you know what, that idea I've been thinking about for the last 5, 10 years, I'm actually going to go try that tomorrow. And you try it tomorrow and it fails miserably, you'll learn something. You'll go, hey, you know what? That idea needs to be adjusted, or you know what? I need to try it this way, or I need some help, whatever. And the next day, you keep pushing on that, your ideas get more and more crazy. So when people call me crazy, I take it as a compliment. A little bit more about this. Autodesk, so it was interesting. I started getting, I'm a sculptor. I'm sort of an anti-technologist, if that makes sense, that I feel like the more we add technology to the world, the more we need human empathy, the more we need creative imagination. That technology often replaces that human element with something that is really great on a science and mathematical and structural level. There's so many great things about it. I got to work with the whole design, the AI and the, I'm totally spacing on the concept here. Wow. That's how important it was, obviously. What is it called? It's basically cloud-based source design for generative design. There it is. Thank you. Wow. That's that jet lag kicking in right now. Sorry about that. So worked with the generative design team at Autodesk, and with robots and welders, we started building three-dimensional furniture. Instead of doing 3D printing where you're plastic, we're actually using stainless steel wire and a MIG welder and a robot, and started building elements. And so in a day, we could build a chair that was actually functional. And my job was to teach the welder how to think creatively around solving the problems. Because welding is a very organic process, it wouldn't stay exactly on design. And so we developed ways in which generative design could reimagine how the chair could still sort of fit a certain percentage of the parameters, where the robot would then sort of start to lean on one side if it was going the other way, or reduce the heat, or increase the wire speed, or whatever to make things. And this was all, it was informing a bridge that's being built in Amsterdam, where they're taking 2 robots and building across. I somehow got recruited by Google X to run their prototyping lab. If you're familiar with X, it's an offshoot of Google now. It's its own alphabet, and it's considered the moonshot factory. It's really just taking huge problems with radical solutions and breakthrough technology to really try to push the world more than 10 times the development. Some of the projects, it has this huge facility in Mountain View, has a bunch of different things. This is Wing, the high-speed delivery drone that's actually testing in Australia. And so this is an interesting concept. When you think about creative entrepreneurship, this was originally idea was to deliver defibrillators to people that had heart attacks. Imagine if you have a heart attack and you can use your cell phone GPS, and this high-speed delivery drone would rush out a defibrillator to you and help you, survive a heart attack. What they found is that that wasn't a very good business case. That isn't a lot of money in saving people's lives in that section. So now it's delivering burritos in Australia. It's a pretty amazing piece of technology. I'm hoping that it will come back around and start saving lives again. The self-driving car, Waymo, you're probably all heard of. Half of these projects, it's the hardware along with the software, and for every one of these projects, there's 98 that don't make it. And so this is a Loon. This is a high atmosphere weather balloon that broadcasts internet. So when there was flooding in South America and they lost all internet, they arranged I think it was like 60 balloons to circumnavigate around that whole area and broadcast internet for people as an emergency system. Now there's 200 of these balloons floating at 10,000 feet at all times around the globe, and the software that keeps them equally distant and spaced is pretty amazing. So my job was to run the design kitchen, which is the in-house sort of prototyping lab. We call it early stage proof of concept. And if anybody's ever watched the TV show Mythbusters, it's kind of like that without the cameras and all the glitter. But basically you're taking a rough concept and saying, hey, I wonder if this can work. And you're slamming elements together very quickly, low cost, high speed, rough prototype, and saying, okay, it kind of works. Great, all right, we're gonna test that a little bit, and then we're going to make another one, and we're going to make another one. And so I was running a team of 12 engineers, programmers, machine learning experts, roboticists, sculptors, industrial designers, in like the world's best shop. And I don't have a lot of pictures of it because half of what they're saying is we're working on the coolest shit to save the world that we can't tell you about, which is interesting and also incredibly challenging. When you're working on something that's so top secret, what's the first thing to go out the door? Collaboration. What's the second thing that usually goes out the door? Diversity. It's mostly, I was one of the few creative people there that was a professional creative. Most of the others were roboticists, programmers, mechanical engineers, business people. And what we found is that the lack of creativity often was the Achilles heel to a lot of these projects. They'd have a moment of creativity where, okay, this is the idea. All right, blah, blah, blah. Here's our rapid prototype. Okay, let's get it to this team. Team's just gonna hire the best and the brightest and throw the most money at it to make it work. That also locksteps it in a direction and doesn't give it a lot of flexibility to change and go, you know what? This idea stinks. We should totally change it, instead of going to delivering burritos. Did that again. And so what I found working in all these different environments, from Stanford to nonprofits to X, is that there are certain elements that I talk about how to build a creative nexus. And that is, one, I don't know if I have it listed, I don't. Sorry, I know you guys are taking pictures of all the words, but I'll just spell it out for you. First is that it's accessible to everyone. Two, it's radically collaborative and diverse. Three is that it's okay to be a beginner and also to fail. And that idea of celebrating failure early is the exact opposite of those 10-year-olds that are starting to worry about their grades. What happened at Google X is that the teams would get so advanced that if their project failed, they'd lose their jobs. So think about it, that's way worse than getting a bad grade in elementary school. Like, if you're gonna fail, that actually, that affects your family and your career and all that, that people would stick to being safe instead of taking those creative risks later on in the process because of that. So X has done a lot of reconfiguring about how they actually do what they call a moonshot factory. And I believe those two terms are a set of opposites that are really hard to make work together. And if you think about most of the creative ideas and entrepreneurial approaches in the world, they aren't about the people that have the most money, the best people. It's about the people that are hungry, that see a need and are trying to do something amazing out of pure faith and belief, out of their garage or out of a small startup or whatever it is. When you start getting too many of the same kind of people together, that diversity changes. So the other elements of Creative Nexus are this idea of drawing new people in. The biggest challenge that X had is that collaboration element didn't even apply to their own teams. There was different robotics teams in the same building that would not collaborate, not talk to each other, not even know that the same types of technology they were developing could be helping each other's projects. So that whole idea of top secret, I think, actually really foils this concept. And so the one that I always like to add is that a Creative Nexus is constantly bringing new people in and training them and having this draw of energy. And when I was running the Crucible, people would tell me it was this big, ugly cement building on the outside, but people would say, I could feel the energy coming off this building, and it's that creative energy that you can't really put your finger on what makes that happen. And so now, I'm applying this and I'm diving back into some new opportunities. And now that I'm a little older than 27, I decided I'm going to launch 2 innovation ideas at once. That's really a great idea on 2 different continents. The first one is in Alameda, my hometown where I live, which is right across the bay from San Francisco. There's a 1902 Andrew Carnegie Library, and I am taking the concept of an entrepreneurial innovation launch pad for people to come with ideas and have them be realized and help them broadcast in the world, and combine it with the state-of-the-art performing arts theater. I've assembled an amazing team, and if you guys happen to be in the Bay Area and want to be a part of it, you can. But that diversity of different people and backgrounds, I've pulled people from all sorts of backgrounds together to do this. This is the interior. This building has been sitting vacant for 20 years. And I just convinced the city of Alameda to rent it to us for 66 years for $1 a year. I do need to raise about $6 million to turn it into a performing arts space. How it will make its money is hosting weddings and corporate events, but it will also be an innovation hub, very much like the Stanford D.school, and the idea of teaching design thinking, entrepreneurial arts, helping people realize their ideas and put them out into the world. It will have training opportunities. It will have an in-house community media center that's broadcasting its programming out to the world. We're going to transform it into this beautiful space with a speakeasy in the basement. And so this idea of, like, no one's ever taken performance and entrepreneurship and try to slam it together with high technology. I think it might work. People are really excited about it. The other project I'm talking about is one that this is one of those ideas that I've been thinking about for 20 years, that when I was starting the Crucible, I wanted to launch. And the more that the world is evolving and the more that we see the need to take care of our planet, I feel that, like, as an individual, as a creative person that is able to manifest as an instigator, that my highest and best use on the planet is to help save the planet. There's so much ideas that are focused on, launching startups that make money to be sold and bought and purchased and all that, but there's so much that we don't think about. I like to tell my students that, I hold up my iPhone and I go, this is what everybody thinks is the pinnacle of design. But let's think about it. The people that make it want to kill themselves. The people that use it, probably getting brain cancer. And the planet can't absolve its batteries and all its technology. I think we can do better as far as designers of the pinnacle of design as something that is all-encompassing, that is healthy for our bodies and for our planet and our social interactions. So I came up with this word called indigeny, which is this idea of a modern-day indigenous person, not specifically any one culture, but that indigenous cultures all over the world have this amazing collective knowledge, and a lot of that has been lost over colonization and a whole bunch of other things we don't want to get into right now. But that we're finding the more that we push forward, things like mushrooms and herbs in the rainforest are actually the best solutions to problems we've been trying to use with chemicals and so forth. And this concept of, I like to joke with students, hey, did you hear about the person that discovered organic produce? It's like before DuPont and chemicals, this was how we did everything. So not that we're going to return to exactly that, but this place where you can actually take that indigenous knowledge, that understanding, that reverence of the planet, and combine it with some of our state-of-the-art technology and actually make a different way to live on the planet, because we're not going to recycle ourselves out of this mess. We're not going to sustainable environmental technology. We need restorative technology at this point. And so I've been speaking and teaching in New Zealand for the last 12 years. And if you know anything about that culture and that world, actually I think most recently, unfortunately, the tragedy in Christchurch is sort of how the world thinks about New Zealand right now, is this terrible gun violence that happened. But also the amazing, a week later, they banned all assault rifles and all semi-automatic weapons. And so it's an incredibly accessible country that is small enough to be forward-thinking. And some of their elements is that they are an island, as we are standing on one today. There's a certain amount of resourcefulness that an island has to have, especially New Zealand is sort of in the far lower right corner, depending on how you look at the planet, away from everything. This number 8 wire mentality is what they talk about, which is bailing wire, this idea of just fixing things and making them work. They have tremendous natural resources. They have this low population density, the remote location, and engaged government. And more than any place I've been, they have this very well repaired, not perfect, but relationship with their indigenous culture. And if you've ever watched a rugby game of the All Blacks, they do this thing called the haka, which is this traditional indigenous chant. But only about half the team are actually Maori. The whole country is like proud of their indigenous culture and include people. And me as an American, I can come down there and be included in that as well, which is astounding. So I've been working with, I keep hitting the wrong button, this company called Callahan Innovation and the local government. And if you're following any politics in the United States, there's this concept of this Green New Deal, which is this loose idea of creating jobs by really focusing on environmental technology. I'm convincing New Zealand that they can do that in the same sort of short span that they were able to take on gun laws, that they, as a world leader and as a test bed, can launch a innovation space that focuses on environmental technology and brings people from all over the world there to learn about how to live and create and innovate with environmental approaches to save the world. So that's my other project I'm working on. And that's how you can reach me if you'd like. I'll now take any questions if anyone would like. Yes, sir.
When you were starting your nonprofit or any of your initiatives and people were being creative, I assume that you had a vision or a purpose or a mission for your nonprofit. Did you ever find that people were doing creative things that were sort of outside your mission, and how did you deal with that?
Yes, that's a great one. I have a mic here, but I'll give that to you. So the question was like how to sort of keep focus. It's a great question. When I was, turn that off. Oh, I guess it's staying up. It's pretty hard to read. Yeah, that's always, you want to keep it open, and there's a certain amount of nimbleness that you need when you're starting, because it's like creating a startup budget. When I work with students around creating a budget, they're like, well, I don't really know if it's going to cost this much. I'm like, yeah, it's a tool. Like once you start operating, you'll have a better sense of it. So yeah, I would get, I just had a community meeting around the library project, and people were wanting permanent collections and things. And there are certain things like, well, we'd be happy to host this. And so having a way to collect the collective dream and let it be accessible is like one of the things we're going to do is just make that facility available for all sorts of other organizations and nonprofits. But our mission is really entrepreneurial launchpad, technology, and performing arts, and just leave it at that. Yeah, it's a challenge, and you have to You know, you also have to be concerned about funders and people that want to sponsor if they want to pull you two off mission. That is definitely, you know, there's a central sort of top dead center balance you need to maintain to keep that from being swayed. But at the same time, I didn't have like a business plan for most of these. I've just had sort of a vision. And so, you know, it changed a lot along the way. And that also, having that ability is good to have. But yeah, you can't do it all. Anyone else with questions?
Yeah.
Yes.
So you spoke about celebrating failure.
Yes.
And a couple of months ago, our Minister of Finance said it's about time we actually decriminalize failure and really celebrate it and, you know, find ways to incentivize people to actually take more risk. So have you done any work actively around celebrating failure, like a failure camp, a license to fail, or something like that, just to really, you know, convince, you know, these entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs, to take more risk?
Yeah, I mean, beyond talking about it, obviously, I mean, when you want to break it down, it's not about success or failure, it's about effort. And if you think about people that have tried things, you know, Thomas Edison is famously quoted for, he didn't discover how to create a light bulb, he discovered 200 ways how not to make a light bulb first. You know, that concept of like trying and failing and trying and failing is something that is, on one hand, we embrace it, but on one hand, we don't want anybody to ever see it. And that, you know, no one ever wants to be a beginner in anything. And you see that time and again with, like, if it's karate, if it's scuba diving, it's whatever, people want to like be a professional or be good at it. In my workshops, I do an improv exercise where we have people, I'm actually going to do this tomorrow, where we have people do a very simple counting thing where the two across from each other, they go 1, 2, 3, and they make them go really fast. And anytime they mess up, and then you add like a clap or something else, and people fail, and you watch them, and sometimes we even videotape them, that people, when they mess up on something as simple as that, they go, oh, you know, they have it, it's in their physical body that they like do all these dramatic sort of like, oh, I failed, but you're playing a child's game, who cares? They talk about it with jugglers. What do you think jugglers are most afraid of? Dropping something, right? So jugglers that get really good, they practice dropping stuff. They just like, let's let it drop. And then it's all about the scoop. It's all about, oh, I dropped it, I picked it up, okay. So then that fear of failure disappears, and then they can just try really crazy stuff, and they know that if it fails, they'll do it. And most shows, and if you've ever been to a Cirque du Soleil show, and you've seen someone on the balancing beam, you'll see them almost fall. That's actually engineered into the act to make it look more dangerous.
Interesting.
Yes.
Can you please tell the rest about the session you're going to conduct tomorrow?
Tomorrow I'm teaching a design thinking for entrepreneurs. It's a 3-hour session from 10 a.m. till 1, I believe, and it's at?
It's taking place at Brink, which is in the Manama Souk area.
Yeah.
So if you guys want to hear more about what Michael spoke about today, then please join us for that session tomorrow at Brink. It's part of the GEC fringe events that we've arranged this week.
Right.
Thank you. No, it's happening in Brink, which is an accelerator outside of it. Yes, yes. Thank you.
One more thing before we wrap up for this. We would like to announce that at 5:30 there will be a pitch at the Palace session at the plenary where the Duke of York, His Royal Highness Prince Andrew, will be given an augmented reality experience. So if you are interested, at 5:30 it will happen at the plenary. It will be the big hall at the far end. So if you allow us, we'll have, due the last time, I will have one more question. Yeah, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your insightful lecture. I am from Nigeria, from a state-owned university. In my country, we have a big problem of unemployment among the youths. We have a problem of unemployment among our youths. My university is trying to do it differently to combine education with entrepreneurship. So once you are a student, you must, we make it pass through entrepreneurial lecture teachings to become an entrepreneur. Now you said in a conventional school you reward you are awarded marks for not making mistakes, while in entrepreneurship you said you should be awarded marks for failing, for making mistakes. You are awarded marks for making mistakes in entrepreneurship.
Right.
Are you getting me? Now how do I marry the two? I'm a teacher. Students are given marks for not making errors in a conventional school. Now we are trying to marry, make students entrepreneurs. Now how do we now, and we are meant to reward them for to certify errors. For making mistakes, you probably reward you in entrepreneurship. Now how do I marry the two?
Right. Well, and obviously you can't be creative in everything. If you get creative with math, you come up with 3 different answers 3 different times. It doesn't work. But I think there's a certain set of tools that everybody needs to learn in the world, and that's changed radically. I mean, universities are based on ideas that are over 100 years old. I mean, the idea of memorizing is sort of, you can get all the access you want on a phone. So it's about taking the tool sets that you have in your hands and then being creative with that. And I think there's a different subset of how you do that. Sounds like we're out of time, folks.
Yeah, I apologize for this. If you have any questions,
yeah, I'll hang out.
Michael will be available, and you can have a separate any Q&A with him. We are starting our second session just now. So if you are attending the second session, starting in a few minutes, you're most welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I want to kidnap you for a while.
That's fine. I'd be happy to do it.